being converted to the meal for the children actually makes a lot of difference. The contracting system, the procurement system to actually get this done. We've seen pictures on the internet as well in terms of what this looks like. Yes, government has good intentions, but in terms of execution, it is pretty faulty. So I'm also saying that, look, beyond just the students themselves even having access to meal in school, can we also look at also ensuring that parents themselves can even provide for this child? Because that child eats in school and then goes back home and then hawks through the length of, Bere, or hawks through the, the length and breadth of Bodija. The question is, are you sure that that child would actually be able to retain knowledge that has actually been picked up in the school? So it's beyond, as long as the children, for example, are not in a boarding school, system, where everything is actually regimented, that they have to go back home. Then you begin to also ask yourself that, will this be sustainable? Okay. You also want to think about sustainability in terms of, is government going to do this forever? Why not ensure that parents themselves, for instance, can actually
let's actually look at equal access to education itself. Let's go to the northern part of the country. Malala has actually advocated for equal access for both girls and boys here. But if you see culture in the northern part of the country allow girls from 10 years, 9 years to actually get into marriage, and of course the education is cut short. When we have instances like this, then we begin to talk about International Youth Day, and of course our system is a signatory to all of this treaty itself. How do we begin to address culture when it comes to education itself?
Okay, so the legal framework for all of this is the Child Right Act. Okay, so the Child Right Act looks at people under the age of.
But how many states have domesticated?
So we have 24 states that have domesticated the Child Right Act. But your state has what is called the Child Right Law, for example. Yes, so culture plays a dominant role in all of this, and that has been the major reason why we've not had this domesticated in several northern states. Even though so many of them are beginning to review this and see what needs to be done around this. However, that said, I think it's also important to also, look back and say, look, how do we ensure first and foremost that people understand, the value of education? If they really understand that, look, this is the benefit of education, maybe, for example, several of them will push their children to school. I'll give an example. So a man goes into the hospital, with his wife, right? And then insists that, no, it has to be a female doctor that will touch my wife. Now, the irony is that his own daughter, back at home, is not in school. So how will that society provide or produce a female doctor for him? Okay, so we need to help people really understand that, look, this is what education promises. And and that's why it's painful today to see what is happening in terms of the quality of education. The NYC recently was lamenting about graduates who actually can't write. I was speaking with a police officer recently, and he was talking about a graduate who had some case at the station and was asked to write a statement, and it was the officer spelling words to him. This is how to write collect, COLLECT.
Who do we begin to blame for that? So let's look at even the providers of education itself, those who are providing the learning itself. Some of them, according to some allegations, that they have compromised standard here. Some of them are ready to collect bribes for assignments and also for marks here. When you look at all of this and the almighty, there are some schools now, I don't want to start mentioning schools, that some of the lecturers and professors have been accused of having to have sex because of marks. When you have all of these instances play out, are we only dealing with the issue of infrastructure? Are we only dealing with budget deficits within our educational sector? What happens to the principle of standards and moral here?
Okay, so we're dealing with a systemic failure. Let me put it that way. So a lecturer who ordinarily, like I mentioned, education is a social enterprise. So he's interested in just impacting knowledge. He wants to spend the rest of his years, brewing knowledge. That's what he wants to do. But suddenly he has bills to pay. Bills that ordinarily he shouldn't even have to worry about. If his child was in a public primary school, for example, or a public secondary school, he wouldn't need to go and raise 100,000 naira every term to pay that child's school fees. Suddenly he needs to be, dig the ball for his own house. There's no longer what. So it's a systemic mess. And let me say this, very carefully, that the set of teachers we had, who were trained properly within, our system, our great, our teachers, great teaching system. Several of them are beginning to, pen down now. Several of them are retiring now. If you go into Lagos State, Ogun State, or your state, several of them are leaving the system now,
and they're handing
over the baton to a core of other people who are not as professional, who have not received the kind of learning and training that they have received.
Now, that was why I said let's look at government policies. I hope we're going to quickly look at one or two things, because let me start with the issue of culture. Now, you speak with when you have a mentor who had the opportunity of benefiting from the Awolowo free education program and all that, they tell you it's not easy. Even in spite of the fact that they were given free education, they had to do other things to augment what the government was giving and all that. And so you've been given this mental picture that you just must struggle, to have your way. Like life is a ladder, and so you need some efforts, you need energy to climb through. Nothing comes so easy. And so you see a young man today, rather than concentrating on his academics, who also want to look at one or two other things he can do to complement. After all, he's not even sure of what the certificate will fetch him at the end of the day. Now, is that narrative still one that should, be held sacrosanct at this time?
Okay, so it was a role model system, a mentoring system that actually worked in those days. Is it Chike and the River? What's the name of that? It showed you how he was kept in care of a teacher, and that teacher groomed him.
Nurtured him.
Some of them would see a priest and say, "Look, I want to become a priest." Some of them would chance on a vet doctor and say, "Wow, I love the way he does this. I also want to become that." It was easy to aspire to those things. The society was ripe for those. The songs at that time, the movies at that time always pointed to the fact that, look, with education, you have people singing Batariadu Kokoka.
So what's happening now?
So it was a clear case. But look at the entire system, the effect of globalization and all of that on the system today. The aspiration now is about, look, how do you get a bends on the road?
So can we afford not to have, not to embrace globalization? Because it seems it's not working.
Not at all. Not at it's not. Globalization also has its own, several benefits. The fact that with a mobile phone now, I can have, a library as big as that of the, Ezekiel Oluwa.
So how do you strike a balance here?
So the question now is, look, what is the parenting system like, for example? Because it starts with the basic agent of socialization. What's the parenting like? What's happening, within, even our religious institutions? What's the tale, being told, to young people within those spaces? What's happening in our school? And that's why we're talking about, life skills. Now, you were talking about how do you juxtapose, the conventional knowledge in terms of the classroom knowledge and your reality in terms of ensuring that, you can actually fit in. So I'm happy, for example, that, NYSC has a side scheme. They have the graduate enterprise, entrepreneurship fund, brilliant ideas. But we're saying that, look, this needs to be instilled now from the primary through the secondary and even at the university level, such that at the end of the day, we're just talking about, some millions who have gone through, the NYSC, for example. So we're saying that what about those in the informal sector? Because at the end of the day, these two would actually have to interact. Those in the formal sector. So what about the vocational schools as well? There's so much gap now. I tell young people that there's so much gap now in the informal sector that if you sit down today and say you want to become a plumber, you can actually be the richest man in Ibadan by just providing plumbing services.
Okay, before we let
because
you go,
of the mediocrity
what are some of the modalities
space
that we need to look at in terms of solutions here? International Youth Day is here. What are the things we need to look at? Do you begin to look at education as social enterprise like you indeed talked about? And of course, this has been on the front burner too. What are things that we need to start doing?
Okay, so number one is that in terms of government policies, sadly, yes, we know that the max a governor will spend in office is 8 years, but you need to plan beyond 8 years. That's the truth. We need to have a culture where people can say, look, this is a brilliant policy. Acknowledge it, even if you are even within the opposition, you are from the opposition party, and ensure that we need a long term. So it's not just a 4 or 5 years. We need for example, a 20-year plan to say, look, this is what will happen in the next 20 years, so that by this is 2019, so that by the time we're talking about 2029, for example,
where does the social enterprise come in?
So the social enterprise component is also the fact that, yes, if people are going to come into education as a business, for example, number one is that they need to also have the mindset that, look, this is not just all about profit making. This is also about grooming life. So that explains to you why teachers, for example, you hear phrases like the reward of a teacher is in heaven. That's the genesis of it. That, look, it's not about the profit, so to say. It's about you being happy that for every person out out there that you can point to and say, look, that was my student. You know, I made an input on this person. That's what education really is about. And finally, as well, for young people, you know, this is what I would say. You need to look beyond just, you know, what the system currently provides. The system is limited. You know, you have several online platforms that offer courses. You need to look at a job description, for example, in a newspaper and say, look, oh, this is exactly what they are looking for. In another 5 years' time, how do I get this kind of qualifications in terms of skills, in terms of experiences? So, you know, my organization, for example, when we recruit, I don't even ask you what class of degree you finished with. You know, what can you do with this? Is an Excel sheet. Can you walk around Excel? Show us what exactly it is you can do. This is a case study, for example. Show us what you will have done with this case study. Do we teach cognitive, you know, emotional thought? Do we teach, you know, creative thinking, for example, in several of these areas? So we need a generation of young persons who can, you know, young people who can think beyond just the box, who can begin to look at how they can actually, you know, get several life skills for themselves, skills that the university environment would possibly not give.
We must say thank you so much to Sola Fagorusi. Thank you for being here. He is a youth development expert, and we can go on and on and on. We hope to bring you back on issues related to this again. And we hope that some of the issues that have been thrown up will be looked at very critically and make our educational sector really worth it and have more people wanting to come to Nigeria, for instance, to come and study too. We'll take this break. When we come back, it will be another discussion with another guest entirely.